smoke rolled through the base before anyone knew what hit them. In less than 10 minutes, an entire Navy SEAL team was down, gassed, bound, and shoved into armored ambulances that shouldn't have made it past the gates. Radios crackled, alarms stayed silent, and command froze. But in the dining hall, one woman didn't. Nora Quinn, the quiet cook they called Mom Nora, dropped her ladle, ripped open a hidden freezer, and pulled out a sniper rifle she had promised never to touch again. That night, the apron came off, the scope came on, and the SEALs would later swear, "We'll never forget." Why were the alarms cut? Who inside the base wanted the SEALs gone? And how did a woman everyone thought was just the cook become the only line between them and annihilation? You're about to hear the story the history books will never print. Before we dive in, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell for a simple woman, because you don't want to miss the next untold story that will leave you stunned. The alarms didn't fail. They were killed. One moment, FOB Sentinel was just another forward base at noon, boots scuffing across concrete, trays clattering in the chow hall, steam lifting off a pot of stew. The next, silence rolled in thick as smoke, radios coughed static, the lights flickered, and through the glass of the dining hall doors, Nora Quinn saw the impossible, a convoy of white ambulances, red crosses painted bold and bright, rolling past gates that should have been locked tight. In less than 10 minutes, the most feared special operators in the world, the SEALs, were coughing on the floor, their vision blurred by gas. Medics who weren't medics snapped restraints around wrists and ankles, dragging the men out like broken mannequins. Armored doors slammed, engines roared. An entire SEAL team was vanishing right out of America's front line, and command was frozen blind. And in the middle of that smoke-filled dining hall, one woman didn't fall. Nora Quinn. They called her Mom Nora, the cook. She was the one who scribbled names on meal trays, who remembered which operator hated cilantro and which one needed an extra carb load before a jump. She looked like she belonged nowhere but behind a stove, apron strings knotted at her back. But what no one at FOB Sentinel knew was that before the apron, she had worn the patch of the 75th Ranger Regiment. She had once been the eye behind a sniper scope so steady that her name lived in classified reports across 2 continents. For 3 years, she'd hidden that past. For 3 years, she traded brass casings for ladles, ghosts for recipes, blood for bread. And now those ghosts were back. The first gas canister hissed across the floor. Nora's ladle slipped from her fingers and hit tile with a sound that cut through the chaos like a starting gun. Soldiers stumbled, coughing. Chief Jake Mercer, the SEAL team leader, tried to stand tall to steady his men, but he toppled, plate shattering beside him. Sam Stitch Alvarez, the youngest medic in the team, reached for air and collapsed across a bench, eyes wide and terrified. Nora's body moved before her mind gave permission. She shoved Stitch behind the counter, slammed a steel pan into the shin of the nearest fake medic, and drove an elbow into another's throat hard enough to fold him without killing him. For a moment, the world narrowed to the old rhythm her body remembered: block, strike, neutralize. And then, just as quickly, it was gone, leaving only the hiss of gas and the pounding of her own heart. Captain Lila Brooks, the intel officer, staggered through the side door, eyes streaming, voice rasping. "Not hazmat," she coughed. "Not an accident. Gates open. 12 minutes ago, someone inside." Nora's stomach dropped. The base alarms weren't broken. They'd been silenced. Someone she thought wore the same uniform had opened the gates for the wolves. The apron suddenly weighed 100 pounds. She ripped the strap over her head, let it fall to the floor, and crossed the kitchen to the freezer humming in the corner. She shoved aside trays of frozen chicken, knelt, and pressed her hand against a seam no one else knew existed. The panel came away with a scrape, and beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, was the part of herself she had buried under vows and grease and sleepless nights. Her fingers peeled the cloth back, steel glinted. The Mk-13 sniper rifle lay waiting, oiled and perfect, as if it had been holding its breath for her return. For an instant her hands trembled. She remembered another mission, another trigger squeeze, a boy's face too young to shave. The ghost slammed into her chest, choking her. She pressed her forehead against the cold barrel and whispered, "Not this time." Then she chambered around. Brooks caught herself on the doorframe, coughing. "They're loading them now, Nora. Ambulances, not ours. If they clear the wire, we'll never see them again." Nora slung the rifle over her shoulder. The apron was still at her feet. She bent, picked it up, folded it once, and jammed it into her sling. It hung there like a talisman, a reminder of who she'd been forced to become, and who she could never be again. She stepped into the dining hall. Smoke coiled around fallen trays and unconscious men. One fake medic bent to lift Mercer's shoulders, and Nora moved with the precision of a ghost reborn. She slammed the rifle stock into his spine, dropping him before he knew she was there. Another raised a baton. She ducked, twisted his wrist and set him down with a crack of bone. She moved without sound, without hesitation. The cook no one noticed gone, replaced by the sniper no one believed still existed. Outside, diesel engines revved. Doors slammed, the ambulances shifted into gear. Nora tightened her grip on the rifle, breath steady. For 3 years she had lived in silence, feeding men who never knew her history. Tonight the silence was broken. Tonight, apron off, scope on, and the SEALs would never forget. Brooks slammed the side door shut and braced her shoulder against it, her chest heaving with each breath. The air in the kitchen was still bitter with gas, but Nora could feel the tide of battle moving outside, the convoy rumbling toward the gate. Brooks's tablet hung from her chest rig, screen glowing through a spiderweb crack. She jabbed at it, pulled up the base's security logs and turned it so Nora could see. A string of entries blinked in red. Gate override, authorized by Lieutenant Colonel Adrian Voss. 12 minutes before the first canister rolled across the floor. Brooks's voice was low, stripped of the usual polish. It wasn't a breach, Nora. It was an invitation. Nora's stomach knotted, but her pulse stayed even. She had suspected as much when the alarms failed, but seeing Voss's name carved into the digital record felt like betrayal turned into steel. The man had lectured at every orientation about integrity, about vigilance. He was the one who walked the lines at night to remind soldiers they were more than their orders. And now his name glowed in red beside an open gate and 3 stolen ambulances. "Where are they taking them?" Nora asked. Brooks tapped her screen. Last ping came off Mercer's body cam before the blackout. Fuzzy transmission, but he looked east. Industrial stacks in the background. Only one match within convoy distance, the old Soviet hydro plant. 20 clicks out, abandoned on paper, perfect for holding hostages. Nora felt the rifle's weight anchor her shoulder, familiar and cold. The hydro plant. A maze of cracked concrete and rusted catwalks. She could already picture choke points, sniper nests, the way sound would carry in those hollow chambers. The images came unbidden, automatic, as if her mind had never stopped running missions. She sank onto a stool, rifle across her knees, and for a heartbeat she wasn't in Sentinel anymore. She was back in Syria, dust hanging in the air like a veil, a scope pressed to her eye. A boy too young to shave sprinted across rubble with an RPG clutched in trembling arms. She had squeezed the trigger because hesitation meant a dead team. The round had struck true. He had fallen with the shock of someone who didn't yet understand mortality. And for 3 years, every time Nora closed her eyes, his face surfaced, condemning her in silence. Her breath caught. Her palms went slick. She looked down at her hands, one wrapped around the rifle grip, the other steadying the barrel. They were the same hands that had diced onions, kneaded dough, written smiley faces on Sam Alvarez's meal lids. They were also the hands that had ended a life before it had begun. Brooks crouched in front of her, pulling her eyes back to the present. "Nora, listen to me. They don't have time. You don't have time. If you stay here, they're gone. If you move now, you've got a chance." Nora swallowed hard, her throat raw. What if I freeze again? What if I see another kid through the scope? Brooks's expression didn't waver. Then you remember who you are now. Not the one who pulled the trigger back then, the one who just stood in a gas-filled kitchen and took down two mercs barehanded to protect her family. That's who you are. Nora closed her eyes, let the words burn through the fog. Family. The SEALs had called her mom Nora with affection, half joking, but it had stuck because it was true. They trusted her to feed them, to steady them, to be there when no one else was. And now those sons, because that's what they were to her, were being dragged into darkness. The engines outside groaned into gear, gravel crunching under heavy wheels. Nora stood, slinging the Mk-13 tight, and grabbed a battered field pack from a hook. She shoved extra mags into it, a water flask, a rag that still smelled of onions. The apron still hung from her sling, a strip of fabric that tied the woman she had been to the one she had become again. Brooks straightened, tapped her earpiece. I'll feed you what intel I can from inside. But once you're out of the wire, you're on your own. No one else is moving. Voss has them locked down with his hazmat lie. Nora nodded once. Words felt unnecessary now. She pushed through the back door, night air slapping her skin. The convoy's taillights glowed red on the far side of the lot, disappearing into the desert road. She crouched low, breath steadying, and whispered to herself, "Not this time." Then she ran, a shadow slipping from the kitchen into the hunt, chasing the wolves that had stolen her sons. The desert road shimmered with heat, even as the sun dipped low, a wavering mirage around the convoy ahead. 3 ambulances painted with red crosses moved in formation, heavy suspensions groaning under the weight of men who had once walked into the valley of death without fear. Now they lay bound inside, unconscious, stolen from their own base. Nora ran parallel along the drainage ditch until her lungs burned, then cut across to the motor pool on Sentinel's fringe. Rows of vehicles sat in ordered silence, keys tagged and clipped to boards that no one would notice missing until morning. She yanked open the back of a decommissioned medical truck, slid inside, and found what she needed, a folded set of fatigues marked with the Red Cross, gloves, and a mask. She stripped off her grey tee, tugged the uniform over her shoulders, and smeared soot across the badge to dull its shine. The convoy slowed ahead at the outer checkpoint. Nora crouched low, slipped behind the last ambulance as it braked, and hooked her pack under the bumper lip. She clung there, heart hammering, as the guard stepped out of the booth. He barely glanced at the IDs before waving them through. Voss's override had smoothed every path. 2 miles down the road, the convoy veered onto a dirt track leading east. Dust plumed around Nora's face, clogging her throat, but she held on until her shoulders screamed. Finally, the convoy slowed near a refuel point. Just a prefab shack, a couple of mercs smoking by a fuel bladder. Nora dropped from the bumper, rolled into the ditch, and adjusted the mask across her face. She walked toward them as if she belonged, a medic on break, carrying herself with the bored rhythm of someone who had done this 100 times. One of the mercs squinted at her. He was lean, sun-scorched, with the flat stare of men who had stopped asking why. "Didn't see you in the roster," he muttered. His eyes dropped to her hands. The gloves were too clean, no diesel stains, no calluses at the fingertips. Nora's chest went tight. She shrugged like it didn't matter, reached into her pouch, and pulled out a syringe filled with saline she had swiped from the truck. She held it up, flicked the air bubble out, and let the needle glint in the fading sun. "You wouldn't," she said flatly. The man's smirk faltered. He backed away with a curse, muttering about crazy medics. His partner laughed, but the tension broke enough that Nora slipped past, her boots crunching gravel. She could feel their eyes still on her, suspicions simmering, but they didn't stop her. The convoy rolled again, and this time she climbed into the back of the trailing ambulance when no one was looking. The air inside was thick with sweat and sedatives. Mercer's face lay pale under the fluorescent strip, his chest rising and falling shallow but steady. Sam Stitch Alvarez twitched against restraints, lips moving as if he dreamed of something too heavy for his young body to carry. Nora's throat tightened. She crouched between them, hidden in shadow, her rifle strapped across her back, every nerve on edge. A guard in the passenger seat called back in a lazy drawl. "All secure?" Nora forced her voice lower, rougher. "Secure." The man grunted and turned away. The convoy pressed on, engines droning, dust painting the windows. Nora exhaled slow, the taste of fear sharp in her mouth. For a moment, she let her hand rest on Stitch's shoulder, whispering under her breath, so only he might hear, even in dreams. "Hold on, kid. I'm here." The road stretched east, every mile dragging them deeper into the wolf's den. Nora kept her mask tight, her posture loose, and prayed the old instincts would hold one more time. The convoy rattled off the main road and onto cracked asphalt, weeds pushing through old Soviet concrete. The hydro plant loomed ahead like the skeleton of some long-dead beast. Towers bent, windows black, rust bleeding down its flanks. The ambulances braked inside a gutted loading bay, their headlights slicing through dust and graffiti. Mercenaries spilled out, hauling limp seals like sacks of grain. Nora slid from the last ambulance, keeping her mask up and her steps casual. No one looked twice at another medic until one of them noticed her pack slung too heavy for just supplies. She shifted it behind her hip and walked faster into shadow. Inside, the corridors smelled of mildew and fuel. Wires snaked along walls, feeding power to humming boxes that had no business being in an abandoned ruin. Someone had outfitted the plant with precision. This wasn't a smash and grab, it was a stage. She ducked into a maintenance alcove and pulled Brooks's small data stick from her pocket, plugged into a junction box. It blinked once, feeding stolen data into a secure channel. Nora scrolled through the readout, her chest tightened. Biometric sensors, gas dispersal valves, fail-safe triggers. Each seal was wired to a dead man's system. If one flatlined, or if the wrong lock was tripped, the restrooms would vent lethal gas. And the hub of the network pulsed on her screen with a familiar identifier. Auth code, VOS. Her jaw clenched. It wasn't just negligence, it was ownership. Voss had built the very cage holding her boys. Shouts echoed down the corridor. Nora killed the screen and pressed herself against cold concrete as two mercs dragged Stitch past, his head lolling. She caught sight of the device strapped to his chest, a patch the size of a deck of cards, lights blinking in rhythm with his pulse. A cable ran from it to a portable hub on the guard's hip. Dead man's switch, hardwired. If Stitch's heart spiked, or if the hub disconnected, the plant's whole system would think the seals were compromised and flood their chambers with poison. Nora's stomach churned. The kid's breath hitched, shallow and panicked. He was the youngest, the one who still blushed when she teased him at the counter, who drew doodles in the margins of his field notes. Now his pulse was the trigger for 380 lives. She forced herself to move, trailing the guards at a distance. They shoved Stitch into a reinforced cell, glass walls fogged with condensation. Inside, Mercer and the others were chained in rows, monitors stuck to their skin, wires feeding into a central console that pulsed like a heart. Nora crouched behind a stack of rusted pipes, watching, memorizing. A new voice cut through the hall, calm and cultured. "Check the seals. The Americans built these rooms to hold turbines. They'll hold men just as well." Adrian Voss stepped into view, his uniform immaculate, boots polished despite the dust. He moved like a man inspecting his own property. Nora's hands curled around her rifle strap. Seeing him there, not just a shadow on a data feed, made her teeth ache. "Colonel," one of the mercs said, deferential. Voss gave a thin smile. "Good. Keep them stable. The Emir will arrive by dawn. Until then, no one touches the triggers. Not unless I say so." He turned, and for an instant his gaze swept the catwalks above. Nora flattened into shadow, heart thundering, but his eyes slid past untroubled. He believed the base locked behind him, believed no one had slipped through his net. When he was gone, Nora let out a slow breath. The The rage in her chest burned cold, sharpening her focus. The SEALs weren't just prisoners. They were leverage in a game Voss had orchestrated. And the boy she'd sworn to protect was wired to a bomb disguised as his own heartbeat. She whispered into the empty air, steadying herself. Not this time, not him. Then she slid deeper into the plant, every sense hunting for a way to cut the wires without cutting lives. Nora lay prone along a rusted catwalk high above the turbine hall, the Mk-13 pressed into her shoulder. The air smelled of iron and mold, a damp tomb where voices carried too far. Below, mercs patrolled in lazy arcs, rifles slung, the arrogance of men who believed the trap already sprung. Banks of monitors glowed behind them, heart rates and oxygen levels scrolling across screens. Every SEAL was a hostage to his own pulse. She eased the bolt, chambering her first round. Her finger rested near the trigger but not on it. And that was when the ghost came. Syria, 2019, heat waves rippling through rubble, a boy sprinting with an RPG. Her scope crosshairs had centered on his chest, too steady, too certain. The squeeze had been automatic, her training flawless. And when his body hit the ground, his eyes had found hers, wide with a question she would never answer. Her breath caught, the sights blurred. She curled her finger away, nails digging into her glove. For 3 years she had buried the shooter inside, hidden her behind pots and pans. Now she was asking herself to let her out again. Below, one of the mercs stopped to light a cigarette. His partner laughed at something crude. Behind them, Mercer's chest rose and fell, shallow but steady, his wrists chained to steel rings in the wall. Stitch twitched against his restraints, the dead man's switch on his chest blinking like a heartbeat she could not miss. Nora forced herself to inhale, to count. 1, 2, 3. She whispered the mantra her father had taught her on the range. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. She let the ghost flicker in and out of focus, then replaced it with the present. Grown men, armed, complicit in betrayal. No children here, no hesitation. Her finger settled on the trigger. She aligned the reticle just off the guard's temple. Non-lethal, if she angled it right. The rifle cracked, a thunderclap in the cavern. The round tore through the cigarette, snapping his head back with shock more than injury. He collapsed, hands clawing at his face, screaming that he was blind. His partner spun, searching shadows. Nora shifted, exhaled, squeezed again. The second round shattered the man's rifle stock, splinters cutting his cheek as he fell backward with a howl. Panic spread, mercs scrambled, shouting that snipers were in the rafters. Nora used the chaos, snapping shots that struck wrists, knees, gun barrels. Precision born of rage and restraint. She would not kill if she didn't have to. Each round sang with muscle memory, her body remembering what her mind tried to bury. The last guard standing near the console reached for the override. Nora's scope locked on his hand and her chest seized again. Syria, the boy's eyes. She almost froze. Almost. Then Stitch groaned. The monitor on his chest spiking, lights flashing red. The dead man's system stirred. Nora bit down on her fear and fired. The round smashed through the guard's wrist, jerking his hand away from the console before he could trigger it. Blood sprayed the panel, but the lights stabilized. The switch reset. The boy's ghost faded, replaced by Stitch's shallow breathing. Silence fell, broken only by moans of wounded mercs. Nora slung her rifle, scrambled down the stairs 2 at a time, boots echoing. She reached Mercer's cell first, dropped to one knee, and yanked a set of lockpicks from her boot. He stirred as the cuffs clicked loose. "Mom, Nora?" His voice rasped, disbelief mixing with relief. "Quiet," she hissed, pressing a finger to his lips. "You're not free yet." She worked through the chains of 2 more SEALs, each man blinking at her with the same mixture of confusion and awe. They had thought she was just the cook, the woman who scrawled names on lids and remembered who hated cilantro. Now she moved like a ghost among them, rifle slung, hands steady. Mercer's voice steadied as he gathered himself. "What's the play? You get these men moving," she said, thrusting a confiscated rifle into his hands. "I'll get to Stitch. He's wired to a bomb, and I'm the only one who knows how to cut it." Mercer gripped her shoulder, eyes burning. "We'll follow your lead." For a flicker of a second, the weight of command pressed down again, the same weight she had fled into kitchens and recipes to escape. But this time, she didn't flinch. She nodded, then rose, rifle at the ready, and disappeared deeper into the hall, where Stitch lay bound to his own heartbeat. The turbine hall was chaos, but the deeper Nora pushed into the plant, the more the noise faded. Here the walls hummed with a different kind of threat. Wires buzzing, fans whirring, consoles alive with a heartbeat not their own. The core chamber yawned ahead, concrete stained with decades of oil and damp, and in the center of it all was a glass-walled cell. Inside, Sam Stitch Alvarez lay strapped to a gurney, the dead man device on his chest blinking with each fragile rise of his ribcage. Nora's throat tightened. Every beep was a reminder that if his pulse spiked, if his heart failed, if someone yanked a single cable wrong, every SEAL chained in the rooms behind her would drown in gas. And standing beside Stitch was Adrian Voss. He wasn't wearing a mask now. His uniform was crisp, collar stiff, insignia gleaming as if he'd polished it for this moment. He looked like he belonged at a promotion board, not in the belly of Betrayal. His hand rested casually on a slim control unit wired directly into the console. He turned his head slightly, as though he had been expecting her all along. "Ah," he said softly, "the cook." Nora raised her rifle, but his thumb hovered over the switch. "You'll drop it," he said, "because you understand. One twitch of my hand, and all your boys die choking." Her breath steadied, even as rage scalded her throat. "You fed them to wolves," he smiled thinly. "I shepherded them into a lesson. Do you know what happens to a nation that trusts too much in heroes? It decays, it rots. Sometimes you need a controlled burn to keep the forest alive. Handing a SEAL team over to the Emir is nothing more than leverage. It buys us balance." "You call this balance?" Nora spat. "You sold your own." Voss tilted his head, eyes cold. "You should thank me. I kept you in a kitchen where you could do no harm. Imagine the mess if you had stayed a sniper. Men like you, like me, we don't belong on front lines anymore. We belong behind curtains, deciding which lives weigh more than others." Stitch groaned faintly. The device on his chest ticked faster, lights flashing amber. Nora froze, keeping her crosshairs trained on Voss's temple. If she missed, if he flinched, Stitch's death would pull everyone else with him. Her apron brushed against her ribs where it hung from her sling, fabric smudged with grease and smoke. A memory struck, her father, leaning over a workbench, saying that cloth could be shield, rag, blindfold, whatever you needed it to be in the moment. She felt the idea slot into place like a round chambering. Slowly she lowered her rifle a fraction. "You're right, Adrian," she said, her voice calm. "I'm not a sniper anymore." She shrugged the apron free, holding it loose in one hand. "I'm just a cook," he sneered. "And what will you do, serve me stew?" She flicked the apron across the room. It spun through the air, a sudden blur of white, and landed square across Stitch's chest. The dead man device screamed as its thermal sensors lost lock, reading only cloth. In that fraction of a second, Voss's eyes widened at the distraction. Nora squeezed the trigger. The round tore through fabric, splitting the apron's folds, and punched into the control unit in Voss's hand. Sparks exploded, the switch shattering into fragments. Voss cried out, clutching his ruined hand, stumbling back. The console wailed, then reset, the lights stabilizing back to green. Stitch gasped, alive, the apron now blackened, but shielding the device long enough for the system to recalibrate. Voss staggered, fury in his eyes. "You—" Nora was already moving, slamming the butt of her rifle into his jaw, sending him crashing to the floor. She pinned him with a knee, ripped the control cable from his belt, and tossed it across the chamber. The overhead lights cut out, replaced by the sharp chatter of rifles echoing from the halls. Mercer and the SEALs had rallied, armed with scavenged weapons, storming the plant like wolves unleashed. Gunfire rattled, boots pounded, and mercenaries shouted in panic as their trap unraveled. Nora dragged Stitch off the gurney, cradling his head against her chest. "Easy, kid, you're safe." She ripped the apron free, now scorched and torn, and used it to wrap around his chest, binding the broken device tight so it couldn't slip. Mercer burst through the doorway, rifle up, eyes sweeping until they found her. Relief and awe collided on his face. "Nora, you... No time," she barked. "Get him out. Voss is alive. Keep him that way. He's proof of what was done here." Mercer grabbed Stitch, hauling him toward the exit as two SEALs flanked. Nora pushed to her feet, rifle raised, scanning the catwalks. Enemy fire rattled, but the SEALs pressed forward, cutting down mercs who moments ago had been smug and careless. The plant thundered with the sound of reversal, captors becoming captives, the betrayed becoming the avengers. Nora moved with them, laying down precise fire, clearing corners, covering retreats. Every step deeper into the plant was another chain broken, another man freed. Voss lay groaning against the wall, clutching his ruined hand. Nora looked down at him once, her eyes cold as iron. "You thought you buried me in a kitchen," she said, "but you forgot. I know how to feed fire too." Then she turned away, following her boys back into the fight. By dawn, the hydro plant was theirs. The Emir's men were in chains. The SEALs stood alive, battered but unbroken, and at the center of it all, Nora Quinn lowered her rifle, apron scorched and stained, hanging from her sling like a battle flag, and the men she had saved whispered the words that would follow her forever: "We'll never forget." Smoke still hung over the hydro plant like a shroud when the last gunshots faded. Mercenaries were being zip-tied in lines, their weapons stacked in useless piles. SEALs moved through the corridors with grim efficiency, their faces streaked with grime but alive, every one of them owing that life to the woman who had walked out of her kitchen and into their war. Nora leaned against a concrete pillar, breathing hard, the MK-13 across her knees. Her apron, burned, tattered, still clung to her sling. She had used it as shield, distraction, bandage, and now it felt like a relic, heavier than steel. She thought she was alone again, the only cook-turned-sniper, the only ghost hiding in plain sight. Then a voice crackled through her earpiece, smooth, familiar. "Nicely done, Nora," said Captain Lila Brooks. Nora frowned. "You've been listening this whole time?" A soft laugh came back. "Not just me." Static shifted, then cleared, revealing another channel alive with voices. Calm, professional, precise. Cooks, mechanics, janitors, men and women scattered across bases the world over. They weren't speaking in panic. They were giving status reports, using code names, feeding intel. Nora's pulse jumped. "Who are they?" Brooks stepped into the chamber, her face streaked with smoke but her eyes bright. "You thought you were buried in a kitchen, Nora, but you were planted, part of something bigger. We call it Guardian Kitchens." The words hit like a second shot to the chest. Brooks went on, her voice low but urgent. "Decades ago, someone realized that when systems fail, when command freezes, when betrayal cuts the line, the only ones left standing are the overlooked. The cooks, the clerks, the ones no one thinks to watch. So we built a network, quiet, hidden. Each of you trained once, each of you living undercover, waiting for the day the wolves slipped past the gate. Tonight you weren't just saving SEALs, you were activating the program." Nora stared, the weight of the rifle across her knees suddenly heavier. "You mean I wasn't the only one?" Brooks shook her head. "Not even close. You were the first to break cover. And now every Guardian knows the time is here." From the far side of the hall, Mercer approached, Stitch limping at his side, pale but alive. The kid's chest still bore the scorched imprint where the dead man's switch had been, apron cloth wrapped around him like a shield. Mercer stopped in front of Nora, eyes burning. "You saved us when command betrayed us. You fed us when we didn't know we were starving. You stood when we were down." He glanced at the men gathering behind him, each one bruised, bloodied, but standing tall. "From now on, you're not just Mom Nora. You're the angel of the kitchen." The SEALs echoed it, voices rough but steady. Angel of the Kitchen, a title born not of uniform or rank, but of survival and gratitude. Nora felt the words settle into her bones. She had carried ghosts for years, guilt like a stone in her chest. But looking at these men, her boys, her family, she felt something else. The ghost of the boy in Syria didn't vanish, but his eyes softened. She hadn't come back to kill. She had come back to save. Brooks touched her shoulder. Guardian Kitchens will reach out when the dust settles. You'll have a choice. Go back to stirring pots, or train others to stand where you stood tonight. Nora looked down at the apron, blackened and torn, and then at Stitch's faint smile as he leaned against Mercer. For the first time in years, she felt the weight lift, just enough to let her breathe. She slung the rifle, stood, and faced the men who would carry her name back to the world. "I'm still your cook," she said, voice steady. "But now you know, I've got more than recipes in my hands." And as dawn spilled through the broken roof, painting the ruin gold, the seals whispered again the words she would never forget, "We'll never forget." Dawn crept over the hydro plant, turning the rusted catwalks and broken windows into shards of gold. The seals stood scattered through the chamber, bruised and battered but alive. Their chains lay in piles at their feet, mercenaries bound where they had once strutted with weapons. In the corner, Adrian Voss sat slumped against a concrete pillar, his hand mangled, uniform smeared with dust and blood. For the first time in his career, he looked small. Mercer strode up, rifle slung, jaw tight. He crouched in front of Voss. "You tried to sell us off like cattle," he said, voice low but carrying. 381 men. And if it hadn't been for her," he jerked his head toward Nora, "we'd all be ghosts right now." Voss tried for defiance, but it came out ragged. "You think anyone will believe you? I'll say it was hazmat. I'll say it was protocol." Brooks stepped forward, tablet in hand, her face pale but steady. "Not when your own access codes are burned into the system logs. Not when your fingerprints are on the control unit. You're done, Adrian. Washington will have your head before sunset." The colonel's eyes darted to Nora, desperate. "You think you've won? You've only delayed the inevitable. This country breeds wolves, and you—" he sneered weakly. "You belong in a kitchen, not a battlefield." Nora looked at him for a long moment, then bent and picked up her apron from where it had fallen in the fight. She held it up, scorched and torn, blackened by smoke and bullet fire. "You're right," she said. "I do belong in a kitchen. But you forgot. Kitchens feed armies, and sometimes they burn." She dropped the apron back into her sling, turned her back on him, and walked away. By noon, helicopters thundered overhead, carrying the freed SEALs back to Sentinel. Journalists would never hear about what happened. Official reports would speak only of a containment breach and swift action by internal security. Nora's name did not appear once. When the SEALs were debriefed, they stuck to the script in front of brass, but the looks they gave Nora across the tent told the truth. Quiet nods, the kind of respect no medal could buy. That night, in the mess hall at Sentinel, the kitchen was still. Pots gleamed, pans scrubbed, counters clean. Someone had nailed an old piece of plywood above the serving line. On it hung two things: a battered MK-13 rifle, sling cut but barrel gleaming, and the apron, soot-stained and patched, draped across it like a flag. Beneath, scrawled in chalk by a dozen different hands, were three words: "We'll never forget." Stitch shuffled in, chest still wrapped in bandages, eyes wide. He stood in front of the makeshift shrine, tracing the apron with his fingers. Mercer clapped him on the shoulder. "She saved you, kid. You carry that memory now." Nora stood at the back, arms crossed, unseen. She didn't want thanks, didn't want parades or medals. She wanted them fed, safe, alive. Still, when she saw the rifle and apron together, she felt something shift. For years she'd seen them as opposites, violence and mercy. Now they hung side by side, two halves of the same truth. Brooks found her later, slipping a small folder into her hand. Inside was a single phrase stamped across the header: Guardian Kitchens. Beneath, a short list of names: cooks, janitors, clerks, scattered across outposts from Africa to the Pacific. Every one of them like her, quiet, hidden, trained. "You're not alone anymore," Brooks said softly. "You were the first to break cover. You won't be the last." Nora closed the folder, the weight of it heavy as any rifle. She thought of the boy in Syria, of the ghost that had haunted her. For the first time, she felt him ease. She hadn't come back to kill. She had come back to guard. Later, long after lights out, she sat in the empty kitchen, apron folded beside her, rifle across her knees. She ladled soup into a single bowl, steam curling into the dark, and whispered to herself, "Feed them, protect them, stand when no one else will." Outside, the world turned, already moving toward the next crisis, the next betrayal. Somewhere, another cook sharpened knives that weren't meant for food. Somewhere, another janitor checked locks not meant for doors. Guardian Kitchens was awake now, a network woven through the unnoticed, ready to rise when the alarms stayed silent. Nora Quinn wasn't looking for glory. She had her family, she had her rifle, she had her apron, and when the time came again, she would stand. Because that night in the hydro plant, 381 men walked out alive, and in their voices, carried like a vow, one truth would outlive them all: we'll never forget. 381 SEALs walked out of that hydro plant alive, not because of command, not because of protocol, but because one woman, who everyone thought was just a cook, refused to stay in the kitchen. Apron off, scope on, and history changed. And here's the real question. If you were in Nora Quinn's shoes, would you have stayed behind the stove or picked up the rifle? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If this story gave you chills, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell for a simple woman, because these are the stories they'll never print in history books, but the ones you'll never forget. And trust me, the next one, it's even wilder,